Welcome back to ModCons. Today I am joined by an incredible counsellor. He's also a commentator on Talk TV and just a general good guy. He is an Arsenal fan, so I would say that. He is young, he's a modern conservative, so it felt like the right person to be on the episode today. He's also a fantastic counsellor and someone who was instrumental in Harrow doing so well in the parliamentary elections, the general elections, and the local elections. So he knows his stuff. Let's just put it that way. He is Zak Wagman. Zak, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, Jamila. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for asking me to come and join you.
Anytime. So we're both sitting in very hot spaces on probably
Yes,
the second hottest day of the year ever. So
so
do
far.
yeah, so far. So please excuse our sweaty appearances. But we're doing our best. We're dedicated to the cause, some might say.
Absolutely.
So, Zach, how's your week been? How's life treating you? What's up?
Well, yeah, I think for all of us, it's been, the heat is the only thing. I saw someone mention
Yeah.
today, every conversation on the phone and on the calls like this starts, so how are you? A bit hot. So yeah, muddling our way through it. And yeah, there's no shortage of stuff for us to discuss today after what's been going on in the news this week, is there?
Oh my God, literally. I was writing a list and it just kept going and going and going. And it's like, we're never going to have time to fit all of this in. There's just so much, so many Labour shenanigans. It's insane. It's never ending.
Exactly. We were told just under 2 years ago when we had the general election that this was the grown-ups taking over politics. It was going to be sensible, it was going to be quiet, and it was not even been close to that. They've been trying to get rid of their leader for pretty much ever since then. And the only way they could do it was by flying in someone from Manchester, from
Yeah.
outside of Parliament to come and replace him.
Yeah, I know. The guy wasn't even an MP. That's how much faith they had in their own cohort of MPs. It's not great, is it?
No, it shows, this is a person that has not been a minister since 2010, so that's 16 years ago.
Yeah.
I think he held some shadow ministerial positions under Ed Miliband, but stopped doing them, therefore, 11 years ago. And
Yeah.
this was the best they could find. I mean, really, Keir Starmer was the best they could find
Yeah.
previously, and we know how that worked out. But it doesn't speak volumes about their confidence in their own colleagues, does it?
No. And the funny thing is, so obviously Keir Starmer finally stood down, as was long anticipated. I think since Glasses for Passes, it just felt like he wasn't the man that he presented himself to be at the general election. And obviously, a lot of Conservatives kind of knew that already, but we didn't really have a leg to stand on. So it was a case of letting everyone see for themselves. And they did discover quite quickly that he was very insincere and not the man he seemed to be. Toolmaker passed aside. But he has finally stood down and he stood outside Downing Street. His speech was very bizarre in the sense that he felt like everything was great. He wasn't really acknowledging the elephant in the room. He did acknowledge that, the Labour Party didn't want him to be there. But it was very weird that everything was about his record. It was all about him. Everything was I, my party, me, this, I did this. And he really looked at the fact that he'd taken Labour from, the Corbyn days to now, but not acknowledging the huge failures that he had made leading up to this point. And I think if he had a bit more humility and said, Peter Mandelson, all of my terrible ministers that I've put in place, sacking Ollie Robbins, all of the things that have led to this. If he'd actually acknowledged that, I think there'd be a bit of a warmer reception from the public than there is now. It's just a bit tone deaf, I'd say.
I think you're absolutely right, Jamila. It was me, me, me. And I think actually, if you had spliced the first half of it and then after that cut to him saying, and that's why I'm standing for re-election and why,
Yeah.
we need the Labour Party to get back in, you wouldn't have known that he's got the worst approval ratings ever for a prime minister, that his own party has forced him out and has been hounding him out and made him U-turn countless times on things.
Yes.
Longer than his list of so-called achievements. And I tell
Yeah.
you, if they keep mentioning breakfast clubs as the only
I
thing this
know.
government has done, before you even get to the point of whether you think it's a good idea or not, yeah, that seems to be the only thing they can say they've done. That and Angela Rayner's dreaded Employment Rights Bill,
Yeah.
Employment Rights Act now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it the U-turn list could have been much longer than his list of achievements. He didn't get onto that. And the thing that actually everything you said is absolutely right. And the thing that got me was so he did his piece as you expect that he would of the things he thinks he's done.
Yeah.
And then he got to explaining why he's no longer going to carry on. And he said that's because the Labour Party's looked at who can win the next general election.
Yes.
And firstly, that general election is, as things stand, not for another 3 years.
Yeah.
But are they not looking at who the best person to run the country is? Yeah, no doubt they partly go together. And no, yeah, I'm sure he thinks he's the best person for that. Andy Burnham and all of his colleagues think Andy is, and myself and you probably think neither of them are the best person for all of that. But I think it's really telling, actually. And maybe that was a dig at his party, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have often said Labour are not serious about government.
Mm.
Labour don't like having to make hard choices, and that's definitely been the case here when they've had to U-turn on things like welfare reform.
Yeah.
Um, but effectively, he was saying, I'm standing down because my colleagues don't think I'm a good enough leader of the Labour Party, not Prime Minister.
Yes.
And that for me was very telling about where his priorities are, and more importantly, where his MPs' priorities are.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're totally right there. It was all about the next general election, and it just goes to show what this Labour Party is concerned about, what that whole parliamentary party is concerned about. It's not about us, it's not about our cost of living, it's not about our aspirations, our prosperity, the success of the people in this nation. It's about them securing their seats at the next election. And it just stinks. And the fact that they can go on the radio day in, day out and still point fingers at other parties and still try and take the moral high ground is just for the birds. I find it really maddening that the sense of delusion is just unrivaled, I'd say.
I think you're absolutely right, and you saw it again. Movie obviously that was Monday morning, and then
Yeah.
the other, in my opinion, big thing, yeah, this week was then how Kemi Badenoch dealt with it at Prime Minister's
Yes.
questions, which was absolutely phenomenal, I must
Brilliant.
say. Not that I'm biased, but
No.
yeah, it was really interesting, and that seems to have cut through with a lot of friends, colleagues who are not into politics. Clips of what she said. You
Yeah.
can agree or disagree with what she stands for and what the Labour Party stands for, but it was absolutely telling that when she went at Bridget Phillipson, which by the
Yeah.
way I thought she did perfectly reasonably, attacking her on policy,
Yes.
policy failures, yeah, and the fact
Mm.
that she has a 0% approval rating among teachers, which is quite something.
It's really bad.
But all Keir Starmer could say about that, his only answer was the Secretary of State for Education grew up in poverty. She knows what poverty is like. Yeah, I'm
I know.
not here to question that. I don't know all about her upbringing, but that's sort of irrelevant. You can be a fantastic education secretary and come from nothing, or come from a very good
Yeah.
background,
Yeah.
or you can come, be an awful education secretary and have had a fantastic education and lots of opportunity, or neither. It is
Yeah.
irrelevant. And similarly to how, Starmer basically said he's resigning because he can't win the next general election, or his
Yeah.
colleagues thought that. You had the only defence for his education secretary being that she grew up poor. And fundamentally, I would actually, if I was Bridget Phillipson, I'd be quite insulted. He didn't try and defend her and said she's
I
made
know.
reforms that are, improving children's lives or
Yeah.
creating opportunity. He didn't even try and defend her and say she's opened breakfast clubs, which is, as we said,
Yeah,
the
true.
go-to trigger happy response. All he could say was that she grew up in poverty. And I think that's a pretty damning indictment on one of his senior ministers.
It is. It's literally their go-to as well. It's very funny. I don't think they see it though, but they genuinely think that that is the only qualification to be a minister is how
Yeah.
poor you were and how poor you no longer are. Like that is all they care about. Are you qualified? Are you good at it? Do you have ideas? Do you have a plan? Do you have great people around you to help you implement these ideas? That's all irrelevant. All that matters is were you poor and do you still think you're poor even though you're no longer poor? That's it.
Exactly.
Did you go to
And
state school? If you didn't go to state school, you're scum. If you did go to state school, you're a saint. That's it.
And it really doesn't matter. Fundamentally, it's the quality of your character. And if you're a
Yeah,
minister, the quality of what you've achieved. And
totally.
some Starmer ministers, who I totally disagree with, have been effective in their roles in
Yes.
delivering things and doing things. I'll put him forward to maybe controversial example.
Here we
Ed
go.
Miliband, I
Ah!
absolutely cannot stand what he stands for, what he believes in, what he's doing.
Yeah.
But running the Department of Energy, he's actually got quite a lot done in
Right.
terms of setting up GB Energy, in not allowing these oil and gas fields to be opened. Although he's now apparently going to U-turn on that, but we'll sort of
Yeah.
bypass that because every Labour minister has to do a U-turn.
Yes.
But yeah, he's achieved a lot in his 18 months or 2 years in office.
Yeah.
I disagree with it, but fine. As you say, most of them, they're not being judged on what they've achieved. They're just judged on where they've come from,
Yeah.
not where they're going. And I think that points to the difference, not just between Labour and Conservatives or right and left, but in a society of people that are
Yeah.
forward-looking and aspirational, and a group of people that want to keep people in their boxes, want to keep people down. And the only thing that's important about you is your background, whether that is your class, your education, your
Yes.
race, religion. And it's really disappointing because it's 2026, and I hate this phrase. We should have moved beyond that by now. Yet
Yeah.
we still have a prime minister saying the only important thing about his education secretary is a situation in which her and her family grew up.
Yes, exactly that. And I think it's a long running theme as well for the Labour Party, or this government more than anything else. Keir Starmer never answers a question directly. Anything Kemi poses to him, asks him, holds him to account on, he ducks. And anything you try and hold Labour ministers to account on, perhaps excluding, Shabana Mahmood, they duck. They can never give you clear answers. She came up with all of these issues that are completely justified, Kemi Badenoch, to Bridget Phillipson. Why, when you said that you were raising VAT on private schools for the first time in history, and one of the only countries in the Western world to do
Hmm.
so, to do this, to create 6,500 more teachers, why do we now have 1,900 less schools, less provision for SEND pupils? These are questions you should answer instead of going on the TV and saying, well, if that makes me a spiteful class warrior, I'll wear it proud. That's not serious. And they still haven't got that. And that they don't seem to realize that's why they are where they are, and they're why they're in this position. There's no self-reflection, there's no humility. And you could see that in Keir Starmer's resignation speech. And you could see that, like you said, in PMQs, they're just not in the real world. They're not aware of really how the public and how everyone else sees them and what they really should be doing to actually confront the issues that face this country. There are really big issues. And obviously, the Conservatives were doing their best to tackle them. They didn't get everything right. And obviously, when you're in government for 14 years, things are going to start slipping and things that people are going to start to lose their heads a little bit. That's fine. But those same issues that we were grappling with are still there. And I just don't feel like we have a serious group of people, and I think we all probably think this, we don't have a serious group of people really thinking about what can we do to make this country better, instead of just kind of firing cheap shots. 14 years, I'm not taking any lectures from you. There's the same stuff that they keep spouting, but it's so vacuous. There's nothing there.
That word seriousness is absolutely right, Jamila. Yeah,
Yeah,
it sums it all up. There is such a lack of serious engagement, seriousness in this party, this Labour
yeah.
Party. Obviously their new, soon to be anointed leader comes down.
Yes.
He's not spoken to the press. He's not done anything. Even if, and I understand he wants to get all of his ducks in a row.
Yeah,
Even if he could have gone and done a couple of questions, said, well, look, thank you to the Prime Minister, he served, but it wasn't good enough. My government's going to do, or if I lead a government, it will do X, Y, Z.
yeah.
Instead, he's taking sort of vainglorious selfies that just look smug, where Rachel Reed and Steve Reed, that are Keir Starmer's closest allies, were right at the front of those pictures. And it's totally unserious. And when you ask any MPs, and yeah, there've been Labour MPs on the telly, on the radio this week.
Yeah,
Why is it that you want Andy Burnham? All they can tell you is, he's a good communicator, he's
yeah,
down to earth. If you read between the lines, is that he's, northern and wears a black t-shirt.
yeah.
Good for him. If he's a good prime minister, it doesn't matter where he's from or what he
Yes.
wears, quite frankly, as far as
Yeah,
I'm concerned. But no one is saying he's a good prime minister because he's going to sort out the issue with the national debt, because
yeah,
he's going to reduce the cost of energy, because he's going to restore Britain to its place on the world stage. And again, we might disagree on how he wants to do those things or what his priorities are. But
yeah.
no Labour MP is going on and saying, I'm voting for Andy Burnham because he's got new ideas about the
Yes,
economy or how
yes.
to get young people into work.
Yeah.
Because no one knows what his views on those are, but they're not interested in that. They just think this
No.
guy's charming. This guy seems like a nice bloke, and people are going to vote for him. And that might be true. That might not. We'll find out in due course. But it goes back to what we said before. They're not serious, and they're only focused on themselves and getting in at the next election.
Yeah, that they don't know what his ideas are, but they don't care. They
Yeah.
just care that the one thing they think Keir Starmer's bad at, which is comms, communicating with people, communicating with the media, communicating with, each other, them amongst themselves. He's just bad on all fronts with that. They think, oh, Andy's great at that, so he must be good at everything. And obviously, Keir Starmer has lots of faults, but comms isn't the only thing that he's got wrong. And if that's the only thing you're trying to fix, then what lies beneath the surface? It's the same kind of issue that we have with, challenger parties as well, on the left and on the right. I'm a very big advocate for good comms, because I think we live in a modern world where people are on their phones, right? They're on social media. That's where you find people. I always say speak to people where they are, right? So TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, videos, podcasts, whatever it is, speak to people where they are. But what else is there? Like, you've got to have both. You can't just say, I'm going to be old school. I'm only going to do, broadcasts and lobby meetings and things like that. You can't just do that. But you've got to be able to do both. We've seen that Andy can do, the comms, But if you're kind of just putting this guy in without knowing what the rest is, that's just a recipe for disaster. It feels like the same Mingval strategy that they use trying to get in to government. And they're repeating the same mistakes. But I don't feel like, when Simon Clarke said, I just want to say, there's an iceberg ahead, and we're sailing into it with the Conservatives near the end. So we're sailing into an iceberg and no one's willing to shout iceberg. I'm shouting iceberg. There's an iceberg ahead. And it's kind of the same now that maybe he's got great ideas, whatever, but nobody's willing to say from the Labour Party, hold on, guys, shouldn't we just check?
You're absolutely right. They're pursuing the same strategy that didn't work before and doing it again. And I think yeah, your point about comms is correct. You need good comms in order to be
Yeah.
re-elected and to successfully articulate what the government is doing. The easiest way that you communicate well or to have a good comms strategy is to have good stuff to talk about. Yeah,
Yes.
if the government was announcing, yeah, we've delivered this, I don't know, railway line, or we're cutting tax for these people, or created jobs here, yeah, that would be quite easy to cut through because people will notice it. People will go, oh, my shopping was X amount
Yeah.
cheaper than last week, or my energy bills went down. Yeah, you didn't even need good comms then. That
Right.
supplements it. Yeah, it is really hard to do good comms for a government that's doing nothing, which
Yes.
is why they keep coming back to the same two or three tired lines.
Yeah.
And until they fix that, they can't progress past where they are. And they're not going to fix that because, as you just said, they're doing the same thing all over again, which is coming up with a strategy of not telling anyone what we're going to do and just sort of going off vibes. And it didn't work for Starmer.
Yeah.
It's not going to work for Burnham, unfortunately. Yeah, he
Yeah.
might do a little bit better. People might be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt again
Yeah.
because he wears a football shirt when he goes running rather than just looks a bit wooden. But
Yeah.
that's not going to cut it when the cost of my groceries is going up every year, the cost of the energy bills going up when young people can't get jobs and so on. Having
Yes.
a friendly face that talks in a northern accent is sort of irrelevant to that.
Yeah, absolutely that. And it is weird that it's kind of the same thing. Like they had 14 years. I would say 14 years in opposition is just as much as 14 years in government to come up with a plan, right?
Mm.
He has been kind of plotting this for a little while now. We know that he's wanted to be PM for probably the entire time Keir Starmer's been there. So I would have hoped that he would have had a bit more of a plan. I think before you have a coup, like he had a plan to get his seat, but I would have hoped that he'd have that plan, locked and ready, everyone he wanted in his team locked and ready before he kind of started the firing gun. But I guess that hasn't been the case. But as you mentioned, Kemi had a stonking, incredible PMQs. It got a lot of attention. There was lots of talk about it because she just laid into everyone. Like, anyone she could see, she had something to say. And like you said, it was mostly about policy and mostly about their failures.
It's challenging at the moment when there's lots of else going on, outside of politics, like the World
Yes.
Cup, like the weather. But if Kemi can consistently, week after week, keep putting in performances like that get her attention, that keep her in the news on Thursday, on Friday, that's the way that she starts to put
Yeah.
that to the country. Because the points she made were excellent. She made them really well.
Yeah.
It's just about making sure people see them and hear them.
Yeah, totally that. I think with Kemi and the Conservatives just in general, I try not to ram us down people's throats because I think slowly catch a monkey, as they say. Getting those wins slowly and without too much fanfare, I think is the way to do it. And blink and you miss it. We've got 5 new MPs and 10 new councils and everything's great and we've made a lot of inroads. So I think that's the play. And I think Kemi being out there doing what she does best and the party just burrowing away, working hard and making sure that we're actually winning. I mean, yesterday we won in Hertsmere by-election. I think there was a local by-election. There was another one that we won as well. You guys in Harrow did a fantastic job as well. You won loads more seats, if I'm correct,
Indeed. Absolutely, we
as
did.
always.
And I think you're right. You've as I keep saying, hit the nail on the head there. But I think there's a nice contrast as well, not only to Labour that have been focusing internally and as we've said are not serious and are only focused on winning elections.
Yeah,
Compare her to Nigel Farage, who is not turning up to Parliament, who
yeah,
is always talking about himself, who
yes,
is sounding off about this, that, or the other. Instead, you've got a Conservative Party, a Conservative team that are just focused, as you say, holding the government to account,
yeah,
getting them to U-turn on things like the social media ban, for example, leading the parliamentary scrutiny on the Lord Mandelson thing.
yeah,
And no doubt straight away will be holding Andy Burnham and whoever's in his government's feet to the fire. And I think, like you say, firstly, that's just good opposition. Politicians are there to provide good laws and scrutinise those laws, and reforms MPs are just not there voting this week. None of them were there to vote on this upcoming puberty blockers trial, where teenagers and people
yes,
younger than teenagers will be taking part in the trial, and reform, who have made a big hay of that sort of issue, were not there to vote. So not only are they doing the right thing and doing it well, but just setting themselves out, like you say, burrowing away, keeping their heads down, working hard, because ultimately that's what I think people want from a government. And there's a long way to go to be back in a position where the Conservatives will be in government. But I think that's the right approach. And I think, like you say, we're seeing that in places in the local elections, but in that parliamentary by-election last
Yes.
week, in council by-election, bit by bit, the people are starting to notice that this is a serious outfit. It's probably the only serious party there is in
Yes.
Westminster, that are going to work hard and try and deliver for people.
Yes, exactly. We're the ones that are doing the deep thinking and also trying to, rectify any mistakes, but also use our knowledge of government
Mm.
to kind of tweak things and make things right for whenever we're, given the opportunity to come back in. So I think you're spot on there. It was funny what you said about Andy Burnham, and I'm so intrigued as to how Burnham v Badenoch is going to be. I think it's going
Mm.
to be really, really interesting, and obviously she's going to have to change her style a little bit. I don't. It's going to be really interesting to see how he responds because I've never seen him at the dispatch box. I have no
No.
idea what he's like as a speaker. I think the only thing he said in Parliament recently was "naughty boy" because when he was getting sworn in, someone was
Yes.
doing it at him. So it might be a bit tongue in cheek. I don't know if he's going to be super serious. I can't really see that from him. So that could be a lot of fun to watch, and it could be like Ian Blackford and Boris Johnson 2.0, which is one of my
I
favorites.
I I think so. And it could be, look, Prime Minister's question shouldn't be entertaining, but it could be entertaining if you have two great speakers.
Yes,
You can think back to say to when Tony Blair was facing William Hague. That was
yes,
two people who were eloquent, charismatic, witty, and could
yes,
come up with things on the hoof. And maybe they will. But yeah, I keep comparing Andy Burnham to like a footballer that's been out injured for 6 months because
yeah,
when a player's injured, you forget about what they actually do, and they can solve all of your problems. So if
yes,
you're conceding goals, you go, we're just going to wait for so and so to be back. They're going to shore up the defense. Oh, this person, they finish off chances, and you ascribe all of these qualities to a footballer
yeah,
because you haven't seen them for 6 months, and they're going to fix everything. And I feel like we've got that with Andy Burnham. And look, I'm very willing. I may be entirely wrong about this, but he. There's no guarantee he's going to fix all these problems. And
yeah.
he's coming back, and Labour expecting this, that, and the other from him. And the reality, like you say, is most of the Labour MPs have never seen him in Parliament before.
No,
Many of them have probably never even met him. We don't know what he's going to be like because while he was Mayor of Greater Manchester, sure, he does some media interviews, but they're not up until the last year or so. No one's really been paying attention to
yeah,
those because unless you live in Greater Manchester, it's not really of concern. His scrutiny is under the combined authority, which is not at the same level as Parliament, and that combined authority, I think, is either majority or entirely Labour. So he probably was not given the
yeah,
trickiest of tests. And so
mm,
let's wait and see. And I think actually, if I was Andy Burnham, I'd be uncertain and nervous, not maybe not nervous, but yeah, apprehensive about what's to come from the other side of the dispatch box because
yes,
Kemi's on form and she looks like she's enjoying it.
yeah.
And there'll be a whole host of gags that will be able to be made straight away while he's new in post. And depending on who's in his government, I'm sure if he's promoted Ed Miliband or demoted Rachel Reeves, all these things can be good lines that the leader of the opposition can
Yes,
use on
that's
him.
true. That's
And
true.
I think if I was him, I'd be circling that first day in September when she's doing Prime Minister's questions to him and already starting to be thinking about that.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And it's interesting. I think there are going to be a lot of the same faces around the cabinet moved around potentially.
It's all very strange because you had Steve Reed and Rachel Reeves sidling up to Andy Burnham to be at the front of his picture. It's all bizarre, isn't it?
That was in very, very poor taste. I think I know in politics, like loyalty isn't a thing, and I'm very much a person that believes that it should be. But that was just, especially, oops, I think both of them, but even Rachel, because obviously Rachel Reeves lives next door. Like, why were you not there?
Hmm.
Steve Reed goes out every week on the broadcast round, saying he's incredible, he's doing a great job, he should be the only one. Mayor of Manchester
Yep.
should stay in Manchester, and he's good at that. Stay in your lane. And the sycophancy of it all, them just standing behind him in this Westminster Hall selfie, which there were so many of them, and I think Andy Burnham himself was shocked. But Burnham's got his big fiscal speech coming on Monday when this goes
Yes.
out. So it'll be interesting to see what he's going to say. I think there's going to be a lot about, devolution, not necessarily national devolution, but, devolution within regions, like what he's kind of benefited from and has kind of been fighting for in Manchester and Greater Manchester. So I guess his idea will be to just spread more money, shed more responsibility, and just hope it all goes well.
I think that's a really good point. And generally, I'm a supporter of devolution. I think if as many decisions can be taken by local communities and as close to local communities as possible, generally, I think that's a good thing. I'm not necessarily so keen on mayors and regional mayors and so on, but I
Yeah.
think the more that you have decision making being made closer to and more influenced by the people that it affects is a good thing. But like
Yeah.
you say, firstly, is that a question of shedding responsibility
Yeah.
so that he can say, oh, well, NHS waiting lists have not gone down, Prime Minister Burnham. Well, sorry, I devolved power of that to
Yeah.
whoever it is. That's
Nothing to
not
do with
my
me.
fault. Um, you know, that's a concern. And throughout all of this, government will continue to give away things as the Conservative governments did as well. They gave more and more to local councils and
Yeah.
combined authorities do. But I bet you they're not going to give them more money. They keep talking about new powers for taxation for local governments and local authorities and combined authorities. And in every news story about it, it says it's going to be new powers for local authorities to raise new taxes. It's
Yeah.
sort of, well, can they cut existing taxes?
And
Or is there going
where?
to be another tax cut? We shouldn't just be looking for ways to tax people
Yeah.
because we're at the limit of how far you can go on tax anyway. Probably already
Yeah.
crossed that. But yeah, if my tax, I get a new tax bill, so I've got my council tax bill, I've got my government, regular tax, whatever, and so on and so forth, VAT and whatever. But then I'm also going to have a new local combined authority tax
Yes.
bill. It's still the same person paying them, whether it's a business
Yes.
or an individual. It doesn't make me more goodwill because rather than go to Westminster, this one's going to wherever the
Yeah. Yeah.
East
Yeah.
Midlands Combined Authority. I'm guessing that's in Nottinghamshire. But yeah, it does. It just seems to me that all the I say he's farming out his problems. Someone else can pay for them. Someone else can deal with it. And
Yeah.
so at the end of it, what I'm going to be responsible for, I don't know, foreign affairs,
Yeah.
because obviously you have to do that nationally. And I like devolution, regional devolution as a concept, but I think he's going to basically just base it off him having been the mayor of Greater Manchester, and not everywhere is like Greater Manchester. And quite frankly, I don't know how good he was as mayor of Greater Manchester.
Yeah. Yeah, agree on all of that. And I think as Manchester Mayor, look, he's done a lot, but a lot of people said there was a lot of the foundations were already built, and it was a case of him, managing it well, which, you can't take that away, but well done. Not sure they're all your ideas, apart from maybe the buses, which he loves.
The buses that are also always run late.
Oh,
They're
really?
20% late,
Oh
yes.
God.
Yeah, they look nice. They're nice and yellow with a B on them, but they're always late.
And he actually got a tattoo of a bee. I mean,
This
okay, that's
guy's,
got a lot.
is a meme of what you'd imagine someone like this would be
Yes,
like.
yes. So, Zach, one of the things that, a lot of advisors are suggesting that Andy Burnham should do, and it's something that people keep pushing on. And as a young person, you might have a view on this, the triple lock. What are your thoughts? Is it now time to say goodbye to the triple lock, or do you think it's something we should protect at all costs?
Look, I don't think there's anything that should be protected at all costs,
Yeah,
short of the defense of the realm. And even then, there is a cost. We need to look at it in the same way that we're looking at whether welfare should be decreased or increased. In the same way we look at all these factors, it needs to be looked at. In a world where pensioners are receiving a lot more and a lot more quickly than people on the average wage who are
yeah,
working full time, I think that's problematic. And I think that needs to be discussed. I think we need to look as well at who receives a state pension, in my
yeah,
opinion, because he's always used the example. So it's a shame for him, but your Lord Sugars of the world. Does
yeah,
he need his state pension? I'm guessing he can probably afford his lifestyle without it, and there'll be others like that.
yeah,
Um, at the same time, I think we have led a lie as a country about pensions for decades, where
mm,
we've spoken about national insurance and the idea that you pay your national
yes,
insurance into the national insurance pot, and therefore you get out what you pay at the end. That was the case when it was launched, and that actually is a very sensible idea. In the same way that we have this imagination that when I pay my road tax, that goes into the pot
yes,
for resurfacing roads. The sad reality is that just doesn't exist anymore. And so the country under successive governments have been sold a lie about what the purpose of national
yes,
insurance is. And I think we need to reckon with that. And that's why I think there is sympathy for people saying that, well, I've been paying in for X many years and
yeah,
I'm not going to necessarily get out. And it's a quite hard circle to square, as it were,
yeah,
on that because you have the dichotomy of no, it's not right that pensions are potentially rising so much faster than the average wage. But equally, we've been told for years that they will keep doing so.
yeah,
And it's hard to go back on that. So it is a tricky one. And I appreciate I've not told you yes or no one way or the other. But I think it needs properly looking at into
yeah.
whether it's means testing and to what can be achieved so that people that are paid in get out, but also not at a rate that is unfair on younger taxpayers who won't get this in 50 years' time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I always say that whenever I'm like at a policy thing or talking to ministers, I always think, why can't we just ring fence these things? It just seems like the most obvious logical thing. If we're about budgets and spending within your means, they should be the budgets. What goes into that should be the budget. What goes into that should be the budgets. Because everyone believes they're in pots. That would be such a huge difference for welfare. That would make such a huge difference if it was based on the entire national insurance pot, and that's it. That's all there is. So I think we do need to start to get a bit tougher on that. With the triple lock in general, I think, and I asked Claire Coutinho about this recently at an event, and I felt annoyed at myself because I didn't really flesh out the question I was trying to ask her, because I think people are still a bit nervous to get rid of, not abandon, but stop the triple lock, because I think they think, oh, you hate pensioners, and I don't think it's that. I think obviously the state pension will continue. It's always continued. We're not saying it should stop. The issue is that we don't think it should be increased every year by 2.5%, the rate of inflation, or wages, or the higher of all three. That's the issue, especially when you have what 1.4 million people out of work, 1.9 million people out of work,
Mhm.
over 1 million NEETs, 9 million economically inactive. These are the things that our focus should be on, as well as obviously defense. So I think there's a little bit of timidity around triple lock, mainly because I think also as a party we really do want to protect pensioners, and we're the ones that brought in the triple lock. So there is that kind of attachment to it. And also we've been, deemed, or I don't know, we've been presented as a nasty party for so long. It seems like, do we want to be the people that do this? But sometimes, and I think a lot of pensioners appreciate the fact that we've got to live within our means, and a lot of pensioners want to, go knowing that the people they're left behind are going to be okay. The country that they leave behind is going to, have the same character, and be the country that they grew up in. So I think we've got to also protect that for the pensioners. It's a bit short-sighted to just see it as a paycheck. So yeah, triple lock is a tricky one. It does feel like a generational debate, but there are people from both generations who do support and oppose it. But yeah, it's hard to, but I think for a lot of younger people under 40, perhaps, it's hard for them to feel like the society is on their side when that's not the priority. They're not the priority.
It is, and you actually said something that I thought was really interesting. You said that if you get rid of the triple lock, or if a party wants to abandon it, yeah, then you're perceived as that you hate pensioners. Obviously there are one person might want to get rid of the triple lock because they hate pensioners, and they might want to get rid of the state pension because they hate pensioners. But the politics now has become so much that, well, if you do this, you hate pensioners, and if you
Yeah.
don't do this, you love pensioners, and there's no in between. And the reality is, there could be 100 different reasons for wanting to get rid of a triple lock, or to, if you wanted to increase the triple lock, there could be
Yes.
plenty of reasons. It doesn't mean you hate young people. It might. And
Yeah.
I think we are too far from being able to have reasoned discussions. I
Yeah.
think Kemi is the serious leader who wants to explain things. And fundamentally, I don't think you can argue for or against the triple lock in 5 words, or in a 20-second TikTok clip,
Yeah.
or even in a 5 minute interview on ITV News.
Yeah.
You can't really have a reasoned discussion about it there. But because that's where politics is now,
Mm,
you end up having to. So I
yes.
think there may well come a time that, because that's the way it's perceived, there may come a time when a party, I don't know which party it would be, will say, well, we are not going to stick to the triple lock. We're going to have the double lock, or we're going to
Yes.
change something within it.
Yes.
And it might be reasonable, it might not. Let's wait and see what they say. And I think as soon as they do, I think all of the other parties will
Well
go and
said.
agree with them. And
Yes.
no one wants to be the first mover for understandable reasons, because,
Yeah.
as you say, they will just be derided by the other parties and by people online as saying, you must hate pensioners and want pensioners to die. And that will most likely not be the case for whichever party it is. And I just think this is one of a number of topics where we need to have a proper conversation about it, as whether that's policymakers, politicians, the media, the country, but we're
Yeah.
not given the space to do so
Yes.
because of the media environment and the way that social media and politics is operating.
Yeah, and I wonder how we set that up, like as a country. How do we set up an opportunity? And do we rely on the media? Do we rely on Parliament to actually have these debates? I think with Parliament in the last, especially in this government, and kind of near the last end of the last. Maybe it started with the Brexit debate because it just took up so much time. But I feel like there's not enough time. This is what was one of my biggest problems with the assisted dying bill, because there was no time to actually argue it, to debate it, to really think things through. And that's why so much dependence is on the Lords now. A lot of people point fingers at the House of Lords, but it's so important because it's the only place where people can really flesh out these debates. And I think as a nation, we need to start thinking of where those, I don't know, where those spaces are and how we can start to, I don't know, hash out ideas a bit more and really think things through. Do you think it should be in Parliament? Do you think that Parliament needs to be sitting longer and actually doing the work? Every time I switch on, BBC Parliament or Parliament TV, there is no one on the benches. They're only there for PMQs. Half the time it's empty, the chamber. So is it there? Is it with us? Is it on us? Is it on, the media to go out and vox pop people?
I think it's on all of the above. I
Yeah,
think the challenge with Parliament is it's so divided now that we are for this and you are against this, that
yeah,
no one makes reasoned points. And really, every speech in Parliament and the quality of speeches on all sides, I think, is rapidly decreasing as they
yeah,
spend less time writing them. More and more MPs you see there, and I saw it in Prime Minister's questions, like gripping onto their phone or their piece of
yeah,
paper to read it. If you're asking a Prime Minister question on an important topic that lasts 20 or 30 seconds, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that you should be able to commit it to memory, or at the very least, only
yeah,
have a couple of words
yeah,
that you need to jog your memory, especially if it is supposedly an important issue.
yeah.
And the quality of it, that debate has gone down. But look, I'm not convinced if you said Parliament's going to sit longer, I'm not convinced that solves it because
Right.
you just end up with more people saying the same things.
Yeah.
And the Labour Party saying we must do this, and the Conservative Party saying we must not do this, and then they all go and vote. And how often does a parliamentary speech change people's minds?
Yes.
I suspect on assisted dying, when it was a free vote, it may well have done for a few, but equally there were loads and loads of speeches that were just of really poor quality.
Yeah.
And so, look, I don't know what it is because yes, we need more conversations. People like yourselves doing a podcast, talking to as many people as possible,
Mm.
sharing that because that is then 30 or 40 or 50 minutes. But
Yeah.
there's loads out there, and the chances are, I know this from the podcasts I listen to, whether it's on politics or other things, I tend to listen to people that I, if not agree with, at least
Yeah.
find like intellectually curious. And
Mm.
I don't listen to the rest of politics because I don't find their
Same.
position intellectually, stimulating from that respect.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we do this. I do think someone needs to sort things out from Parliament in the sense that the quality is so poor. So I
Yeah.
think there need to be changes. So, for example, not that I'm in a position to do this, but I would say, I don't think select committee meetings should be recorded because basically those now are the opportunity for MPs to have a go at someone from an unpopular business
Yeah.
or a water company and post it online, say, I stood up for the people of X village, and told Southwestern Rail how they're all rubbish. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is important that Southwestern Rail is held to account, and that MPs put their case to them. But it has basically just become MPs sit on committees, they call in witnesses with the express purpose of having a go at them,
Yeah.
and so that they can get 50 likes on Instagram. It's a waste of everyone's time and actually undermines genuine scrutiny. I
Mm.
think there is a case for saying that parts of Parliament should not be broadcast.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, MPs should not be able to snip up bits. I mean, how
Yes.
often do we see videos of MPs, and Conservatives do this just like everyone else,
Mm.
videos of just them asking the question of a minister
Yeah.
and you don't get the answer. You
No.
might like the answer, you might not, but it was well, I stood up and said, the bus route number 241 shouldn't be cut.
Mm.
And well, did the minister say yes or no?
Yeah.
Probably, if they're a Labour minister, they might have said, we'll talk about this, we'll see what we can do. And if they were on the other side, they probably would have said no.
Yeah.
But Parliament has just become almost like a big studio for social media recording.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge because if you were to stop recording Parliament,
Mm.
I don't think that's a good thing because it removes the transparency and the
Yeah.
accountability, and people should be able to see what their MPs are saying. So I don't know how you can get both of those things, but I think there's a
Yeah.
real case for saying Parliament needs to be taken more seriously, and the way you do that is stop it going everywhere on social media.
Yeah.
More transparency and more eyes on it is a good thing, but is it really actually beneficial if all I'm seeing is people just putting 10-second clips of where they look particularly angry or particularly
Yeah.
righteous or whatever it is?
Yeah, agree. And I think you're probably right on the clipping of just my question or just my answer. I think when you're clipping, the good, like to do it in good spirit, you should kind of clip the response at least. But it's quite funny what you said about Keir Starmer, just ministers in general not being
Mm.
able to like be detached from their notes, detached from their notes. Keir Starmer was answering a question the other day that was so basic. I think it was about him, and he was looking down at the paper trying to figure out, like, don't you know
Mm.
anything about yourself? And it reminded me of something Desmond Swain said in this podcast on an interview when back in the day, if an MP was using notes and reading in the House of Commons, they used to go reading, reading, because it was such a faux pas. And now, like you say, they're on their phones, attached
Yeah.
to glued to their papers. And I get it. I'd probably be the same, maybe at the beginning, but I think it is a good thing to practice and learn to not need them and just, our forefathers did it and they were fine and they
Yeah.
had some of the most incredible speeches in history. So it can be done. It's just a question, are our attention spans now too short? We can't even, hold the information in anymore.
Exactly, and it's really sad because the idea is you're speaking in Parliament because there's an issue of importance to you or where you feel you can add value to the debate. If you can only add value when a researcher's written it down on a piece of paper in
Yeah.
size 16 font, and you have
Yeah.
to grip it and tell everyone, yeah, if you can only remember that you care about X primary school's roof caving in because it's written on a piece of paper in front of you,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's really poor. And I appreciate, look, not everyone is able to retain information so well.
Yeah.
Not everyone is as confident speaking, and of course, yeah, there will be people that need to use those prompts. That's absolutely fine.
Mm.
But the prevalence at which this happens suggests it's more than just a few people,
Yeah.
that are not as confident at it. And if you go back 100 years to some of the great speakers on all the parties, historically the Whigs and the Tories and then the Liberals.
Yes.
And I don't think parliamentary scrutiny has got so much better or that the points being made are that much more complex, which is why
Yes.
they need to be researched and written down in advance. And
Yeah.
I just think, like you say, whether it's an attention span issue, whether
Yeah.
we've just let our standards drop.
Yeah.
And it's really disappointing because, yes, maybe you don't have to give the most amazing speech to offer a really convincing or important point, but you're more likely to convince your peers of your argument if you lay it out well. The best
Yeah.
speaker in the House is Geoffrey Cox, for example,
Mm.
partly because that is his career. He's been doing it for clients for 40 years or
Oh,
whatever it
very
is,
good.
but because he makes the speech. We love political leaders of
Yeah.
all sides, the Obamas, that inspire people. Even Andy Burnham to a degree, because they evince emotion, they
Yes.
convince you of things. You're never going to convince somebody of something if you're holding an A5 piece of paper up to your nose
Yeah.
and reading it out as if someone's giving it to you for the first time. And it's
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of the country, is this the number one issue facing us? No. But would it improve the government's ability to legislate, to improve things for people's
Yes.
lives? Absolutely.
Yes, and also the opinion of the public's opinion of, their parliamentarians might also, rise if they hold them in high esteem.
Yes.
But yes, Zach, it's been an absolute, absolute pleasure. What are you going to be doing on the last few days of this heat wave? Are you going to be out getting tanned, or are you going to be staying cool inside?
I'd love to say I was doing the former. But I will stand outside for 5 minutes and then go, I need to go
Yeah,
inside. But yeah, there's plenty of football on. I'll be away with my friends for the weekend, which is going to be
amazing.
lovely. And yeah, looking forward to the last few days of the heat, and then we can get to more reasonable temperatures.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Zach, thank you so much for joining me on ModCons. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jamila.